YouTube vinyl community, Paul McCartney fans, random people on the internet. My name is Giggens, and we are here today to talk about Paul McCartney's 1970 solo debut, McCartney, released on Apple Records in 1970. To quote Ringo Starr, he seems to be going strange. So, I love that quote. This is one of my favorite Paul albums. It's got such a quirky homespun charm to it and an indie feel that I think was leagues ahead of its time. That I think really works well today, but I can see where people were a little bit like miffed about it when it came out. But really, really cool album. And let's just kind of jump into this thing. So in 1969, in September of that year, September 20th, the Beatles had a meeting, and John basically said, I want a divorce. I want out of this group. We're good. We're done. We've hit as far as we can go. Abbey Road is done. That's the best thing we're ever going to make. See you later. And that kind of left the other guys a little bit distraught, especially Paul, because this was the only job he ever really knew, was like being a Beatle. And so all of a sudden it was taken away from him, and he was like, what the hell do I do now? So between the conflicts of the business struggles in this band at this point, because the other three guys really wanted Alan Klein to represent them, Paul wanted Linda Eastman's dad to be the guy representing the Beatles, and then he thought at first, well, maybe I'll just have him represent me, and the other guys can be represented by Alan Klein, and see how that works, and that wasn't working. It was basically 3 against 1, and that was the first time that ever happened. In this band, it was always like, everybody's in for the idea, or it's not happening. Even when they were making music, when they'd be in the studio, if someone didn't like something, it would get changed until all 4 of them agreed, yeah, we like this, we can put it out. It was always super democratic like that. Until this year, 1969, everything just completely came to a crashing halt. I mean, it had been a slow build-up for like the last 18 months or so before that, but this year in particular was extremely tough for them. Let It Be fell through. They got back together and pulled themselves together to make Abbey Road with George Martin in the fold again, and that was extremely successful and had a really good time doing that album while they did it. And, maybe they felt like, all right, this is the last thing we're going to do. Let's just have fun with it. Maybe they subconsciously knew that, but anyways, they got through that. And Paul just constantly felt left out or betrayed by these guys that were his best friends. Things were tough. This was not a happy time to be in the Beatles. And so after that meeting they had, Paul took his family and they went up to Scotland and just hung out and tried to relax. And he went through one of the darkest depressions of his life at that point. He was drinking a lot, he was smoking a lot of pot, and he had just been together with Linda for like a super short time. So here she was trying to raise 2 kids with this guy who was just growing his beard out, growing his hair long, and basically not wanting to do anything and trying to figure out what to do. He was super depressed, and getting drunk all the time and just like not being him. And so it took a lot of courage on Linda's part to be like, hey man, you're Paul McCartney. Go write something. Like, you're going to feel better. Go make music. And so eventually Paul was like, okay, yeah, let's try that. And so they came back to London to Cavendish Avenue in St. John's Wood, where they were living. And Paul just basically started like messing around. He had a home studio set up of sorts, which basically is plugging into the back of a tape machine. There was no mixing board, so everything was very, very, again, homespun. So if something was too loud, he'd just push a microphone away or bring it closer or whatever. Very, very rudimentary, what they would now call lo-fi. But at that time, it was like, for an album to come out sounding like this, people were like, this sounds like crap. These days, it would be heralded as like a masterpiece classic. But at that time, again, the Beatles were always ahead of everybody else, so this was the result. So he started messing around, just making a few tracks. One track in particular, The Lovely Linda, was just basically to see if his recorder worked, and he was just a test run, and that song ended up on the album. I mean, the cool thing is you get to hear a door squeaking in the background and just giggling at the end, like they're just having fun. And so the whole time Paul was kind of messing about, he realized he had something cooking here, and he was like, you know what, the Beatles are basically done, maybe I can make an album out of this. And so he kept it secret. He would start recording as Billy Martin. If he ever had to go to a different studio to like do overdubs or whatever, I think Morgan Studios is where he would do a lot of like the tape transferring and the dubbing down so he can add more layers to his tracks. He would record as Billy Martin. So no one knew what was going on. Very few people actually knew what was happening. I think Neil Aspinall and maybe Derek Taylor knew about it, but that's it, and his family. So he did this whole thing in secret because he didn't want the other guys to know about it. They weren't getting on with each other at that point. It was a really rough time to be in the Beatles. So between, I think it was December of '69 up to about February of 1970. So it happened pretty fast. And in between that time, he took a couple of breaks to stop and work on finishing up Let It Be, like I Me Mine. The Threedles got together to finish that song, and that was the last time they all worked with each other until the anthology series. So it's pretty cool. But Paul was doing this in secret, and the only thing he recorded completely at Abbey Road Studio 2 was Maybe I'm Amazed, which is pretty cool. But he plays every single thing on this album, beyond Linda helping out with some vocal stuff. Drums, guitar, bass, piano, harmonium, mellotron, you name it, he played it on this thing, which I think is pretty cool because he's an excellent drummer and he's a really good musician overall, so he can show off his skills on this album, which I think is pretty cool. But at this time also was, the whole Paul is dead stuff was going on, so he disappeared to Scotland and basically, didn't tell people he was going. People were like, where the hell's Paul McCartney? And so, the whole rumor of the Paul is dead thing came boiling up again. And Life magazine actually tracked him down at his farm in Scotland, took a bunch of pictures of him and said, yeah, are you really alive? And he's like, yeah, here's my family. Okay, go. So, people are weird. But, yeah, so, Christmas of '69, Paul comes back, starts laying down these tracks, and by 1970, in about February, March, he's done. And the classic story goes that George, Ringo, and John, there we go, realized there was a lot of Beatles product coming out in the spring of 1970, and things had to get pushed apart, so things were competing with each other, competing with themselves on the charts. And so, the other guys thought, all right, well, let's space it out a little bit. Let's just ask Paul. We just found out Paul's putting an album out. Let's ask him to push it back a little bit. It's no big deal. And so Ringo was like, you know what? Instead of having some guy from the office give him this letter, I'm just going to walk down the street and hand it to him. So Ringo goes down to see Paul. He gets invited in. And they have a couple of, they chat for a little bit. It's all friendly and fun. And then Ringo starts showing off this letter and saying, hey man, I think you should push your album back a little bit. I've got one coming out. The Let It Be thing is coming out. Let's just push it back a little bit. And the rumor was Paul apparently said, F off or get out. Apparently he just started going into a tirade, getting more and more pissed and heated as he was just completely fed up and frustrated that again the other three guys were putting him down again. And it was this 3 against 1 mentality. So he just kind of lost it mentally. I mean, can't blame the guy, I guess. But against Ringo, maybe you should have kept it a little cool, man. But so Ringo left and decided, all right, well, I'm just going to put my album out first and try to keep this cool. And then McCartney's album came out in April. Really, really close to Let It Be, really, really close to Sentimental Journey. The whole thing was just a lot of Beatles stuff at one time. But I guess there's worse problems to have in the world. So that's what happened. April 17th, 1970, it came out. This album's gone platinum a couple of times by now. And it features the classic track, Maybe I'm Amazed. But beyond that, I think, for me, it's one of his most fun albums because he made it without any care in the world. And when you listen to music made by someone who realizes that they're just doing it for fun, a lot of the times that comes across as charming and fun to latch onto. Sometimes it can come across as pretentious and boring, but with this, I think it works really well because Paul was using this as therapy to get through a difficult situation in his life. So that's it. The lovely Linda opens this thing, and again, I love the word homespun charm because it's true. This album is full of it. But, hearing that sound of the door open up, Paul and Linda giggling at the end, it's just a cute song. It's just nice. Let It Be marked a new phase for the Beatles, and the new phase was them breaking up and then trying different things, apparently. But that's where this album starts. We get a really nice piece of, domestic bliss from this song, and I really enjoy that. That Would Be Something is the next track on here, and again, I think this track is really great. It's got a really dry sound. A lot of this album has a dry sound, just production-wise, because it was made in an apartment, but or a house, whatever he was living at the time. I think that's the whole point of the album, though, is to make it sound like complete departure from Abbey Road. Like, here's something else I can do. You've expected so much from me over the years to make this big, grandiose music. Here's something that's the complete opposite of it. I mean, the Beach Boys did that with Smiley Smile first, but we won't go into that. I love the drumming on this. Paul's vocal it goes to like new places. I think he does a lot of like cool vocalizations with his voice. The whole like meet you in the fall and rain, mama, like that. It's just so cool. He's just having a good time. He's having a goof and the whole like, kind of stuff. Yeah, cool song. Valentine Day. I can't tell where the drums were for the mics on this one. I can't tell if they were like one microphone swinging above the drum set or if there was one just in the room somewhere. But I love the really spirited hi-hat play, the constant jamming, the simple but memorable guitar riffs. The really chugging acoustic guitar is great. And then it fades out at the end. But throughout this track, Paul really shines as a drummer. He's a great drummer, and it's so cool to hear him go crazy on his premiere set. Love it. Every Night. This song for me really is one of the first songs on this album that like shows kind of what he's going through. I mean, every night, I lay on a pillow, resting my mind. Don't want to go out. I just want to lay around. I think it really brings up the depression he was going through. What's interesting though is that this song was apparently demoed by the Beatles in early January of '69. So maybe the lyrics had gone through changes since then. Maybe the tone changed. Maybe the message changed a little bit. Who knows? But apparently an early version went through the Beatles camp at some point. But I love this song. I love the way he sings it. I love the way it kind of jams out for a little bit. It's just a nice track. And he's played it live several times, which is cool. Hot as Sun / Glasses. Apparently this song dates back to the 50s, which you can almost hear a bit of that Buddy Holly influence on it, which I really, really enjoy. It's an instrumental, it's very fun, it's got a really good hook, and at the very end of it you hear a little clip of the song Suicide that Paul wrote for Frank Sinatra to sing. And then you get Junk after that, which first demo with the Beatles, he wrote it I think in India in '68, and then tried it out for the White Album, didn't work, tried it out for Let It Be, didn't work, and then he forgot about it. But I love the guitars on this one. They're so beautifully picked out. The sad lyrics are sad. Just a real melancholy feel on this one, but I like it a lot. And apparently this is take 2. Sing Along Junk is take 1. Just an instrumental like tryout to see what they can do with it. And then take 2 is the actual Junk. Man, We Was Lonely. I love this track. It's a sing-along, fun time with Paul and Linda, about getting through it all, about getting through a hard time. But it's really like a bouncy, country-style kind of a song. Real simple in its bass, real simple in its drumming, but just a nice track. It sticks in your head. Side 2 opens with Ooh You, which is one of my favorite songs he's probably ever done. It's just a great rocker. I love the big swelling build-up that happens once in a while for that fade of the slide with the guitar. The guitars on this thing are really sharp, they're biting. There's a killer drum groove on this thing. There's a cowbell. It's Paul having a great time. Just a cool song. Absolutely love that song. Mama Miss America. Finally, we get some of that Paul McCartney bass. For being one of the most melodic bass players in music history, this album is void of his bass playing skills beyond this song. Great drums. There's really cool echo on the guitar on this thing. I love the piano fills. They're kind of like shiny. They're kind of bright. And then there's a couple of breaks on here, and then more rock comes back with an acoustic guitar this time. It's just a long jam of a song, but I think it's really good. Teddy Boy, another Beatles demo here from 1968 or '69. I love Linda's background vocals on Teddy Boy. I think her voice and Paul's together work really, really well and give it a nice dimension. But I also enjoy this song a lot because it works really well fleshed out. Like growing up, I'd been so used to the anthology version where it's basically the Beatles messing around and John kind of ad-libbing stuff in the background. But hearing it become like quote-unquote an actual song works really well. Sing Along Junk, again, like I said before, is basically take 1 of Junk. And it's nice. It's a nice instrumental version. The piano kind of takes over where the vocals would be. And it works. Nothing much to say about that one. And then you get the classic Maybe I'm Amazed, and you can go on for days about this song being one of the most beautiful love songs of all time, but it's the grand standout of this album for sure. It was never released as a single, but it got the most play as a single from this album. It's Paul's first solo masterpiece, for sure, hands down. He recorded the whole thing at EMI Studios #2, which is where the Beatles did their thing. And it's truly an amazing, heartfelt love song to Linda, basically saying like, hey, I've been going through this hard time and you've been there to help me out. Like, it's amazing that you're doing all of this for me and being there for me when I feel like my best friends aren't, and I'm going through this really, really super hard time, and you're there nonstop no matter what. So that's really cool. Just a really sweet song. Um, and it's one of the most spirited tracks on this album. It sounds like a fully fleshed out song. The piano is absolutely amazing on this thing, and the really nice organ. That guitar hook is unmistakable. It's just like that stays in your head. I love the jamming, the riffing, and how it kind of just goes off the rails by the end. I like that a lot. And the last song on here, Creen Acror, if I'm pronouncing that right. The cool rolling sound, the tapping, it doesn't sound like a drum. It almost sounds like someone's tapping on a guitar, like a heavy guitar case instead. And using that as the drum take. But I love the excellent guitar riff, the really cool piano, the harmonies between Paul and Linda are fun, and that deep, heavy breathing thing is crazy. But the drum groove on this thing, again, Paul's drumming is so good. I love his drumming style. Just really works. But yeah, as a whole, I mean, this album really was an escape for Paul. I don't think it was meant to be this grand, sweeping experiment of being like, here's the most amazing album I can make. I'm fresh from the Beatles. Here you go. I think it was just like, here's what I'm up to right now at this moment. And because I'm Paul McCartney, I can have something like this released because I'm Paul McCartney. So I think it worked. But here's the back cover, that classic shot of Baby Mary tucked inside Paul's jacket there up in Scotland. Apparently when they were going through the covers pictures to figure out what would be the cover, Linda took like 50 pictures of Paul like hanging out with a guitar or standing in front of a wall or something, and they showed all these pictures to somebody, and somebody said, that's the one. That's that one of you with the baby. That's it. And then this picture is cool because basically this is the top of a wall, and these black spaces here are just removing the rest of the picture. So this is like, if you were to hold it like this, basically the bottom of the wall would be here, and this was the top. And apparently, like, Linda was sitting like right here, just putting these cherries around and this red liquid in the bowl there to make them look like they came out of the bowl. And then they just cropped out the rest. So kind of cool. The original picture, I haven't seen the original picture, but I've seen them setting up this display, which is pretty cool to look at. And on the inside, you got this collage, just nice pictures of Paul and the kids and Linda hanging out. There's Martha the sheepdog there, and there's Standing Stone from the Standing Stone album. But yeah, just nice pictures of them hanging out. This version in particular, I wanted to show off because I think it's cool. I've got an original Apple Capital logo one, or original Apple logo one. But check this out. This is the Black Label Capital, which I think is awesome. You don't come across these too much, at least in my journeys anyway. So fun to find that. So this is probably from the mid 70s, I'd say, mid to late 70s maybe. But it's in really nice shape. So yeah, overall, this really is one of my favorite Paul McCartney albums because it's so fun and it's so therapeutic and it's just them having a good time, and sometimes that's a nice thing to listen to. So if I had to give this thing a rating, I'd probably give this thing like probably a 7 or 8 out of 10. I don't think it's his best album, but I think for me it's one of my favorite albums by him, and sometimes that means more because you go to something like this more because it makes you feel good. But yeah, excellent album. I mean, you got tracks like That Would Be Something, Every Night, Maybe I'm Amazed, Ooh You, Lovely Linda. It's just some great songs and an interesting snapshot of the guy at this time. So, and when this album came out, there's a press packet that Paul and Derek Taylor basically made together, where Derek Taylor made all these questions up and Paul would just answer them. One of the questions was, do you foresee yourself working or recording with the Beatles in the future? And there's one answer was no. And instead of everybody taking that as like, oh, well, maybe that's just like for now, the media went nuts and said, Paul quits the Beatles. The Beatles are done. Paul's out. And because that happened, that was basically just the death knell. Which I think upset John because he really was the first one to say like, I'm out. And then here's Paul all over the TV and stuff saying like, maybe I'm out. So that was the end of the Beatles, April 1970. So my name is Giggens. This has been Album Reviews with Paul McCartney, released on Apple Records. This one's on Capitol. And that's it. So thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you think about this album because I would love to talk about this album in the description, in the chats down below. And that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.